I spent 34 years building houses for other people, not designing them from a distance, not managing crews from an office, but actually building them. I know how to read a foundation, how to feel for the give in a timber frame before it fails, how to look at a wall and know whether it will hold the weight placed on it. I retired at 68 with 2 good knees, a bad shoulder, and a house in Whanganui that I had built with my own hands on a section my father left me. I did not expect the knees to outlast the shoulder by such a margin. The specialist, a careful woman named Dr. Priya Mehta, who had the particular stillness of someone who delivers difficult news many times a week, told me that the rotator cuff damage was extensive and that I had, in her considered opinion, been ignoring it for approximately a decade. She said surgery was the right path. She said recovery would take time. She said I would need support at home for at least the first few weeks. I thanked her and drove myself back to Whanganui in the rain. I want to be precise about what I did next, because precision has always mattered to me. I called each of my 3 children that same evening, not together, not in a group message the way people do things now, but individually, one after another, because they each deserved a proper conversation, and because I wanted to hear each of their voices when I told them. I am 71 years old, and I was going under general anesthetic, and I thought my children should know. My oldest, my son Derek, is 44. He lives in Auckland with his wife and their 2 teenage boys. He works in logistics, which I have always understood to mean he is very busy in ways that are difficult to explain to people who are not also in logistics. When I told him about the surgery, he said, "Dad, that's no good." He said, "We'll sort something out." He said, "Let me talk to Karen and we'll figure out the timing." He said all of this while I could hear the particular background sounds of a man standing in his own kitchen, somewhere between dinner and the evening, not quite present and not quite absent. I said I appreciated it. He said, "Of course, Dad. Of course." My daughter Lynette is 41. She lives in Christchurch with her partner and her daughter. My granddaughter Poppy, who is 8 years old and who I think about more than I probably let on. Lynette called me back before I even called her, which I took as a good sign. She had already heard from Derek. She said, "Dad, I'm coming up." She said it with the certainty of someone who means it. She said, "I'll take the week off, it's not a problem." Then she paused, the way people pause when a second thought arrives uninvited, and she said, "Actually, let me just check with Marcus about Poppy's schedule, and I'll confirm tomorrow." I said that would be fine. She never confirmed. My youngest, my son Brendan, is 37. He is the one I worry about most, if I am being honest. Which I am, because at 71 there is less reason than ever to be anything other than honest. He has been between jobs more times than I can count, between relationships almost as often, and he has a quality that I have spent 37 years trying to name accurately. It is not laziness. Exactly. It is more like an absence of urgency, as though the things that need doing will eventually be done by someone, and he has made a quiet peace with the possibility that the someone might not be him. When I told him about the surgery, he said, "Oh, Dad, that's rough." He said, "Shoulder surgery is mean." He said, "I'll try to get up there." I told him it was a 5-hour drive from Wellington. He said, "Yeah, nah, I know, I'll try." The surgery was scheduled for the 3rd Tuesday in August. I had given all 3 of them 6 weeks' notice. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, you can plant a vegetable garden and harvest the first of it. You can save enough annual leave to cover a long weekend. You can drive from Wellington to Whanganui and back, approximately 40 times if you wanted to. 6 weeks is not a surprise. 6 weeks is an invitation with plenty of time to RSVP. The morning of the surgery, I woke at 5. The Whanganui River was doing what it always does in August, running dark and full and indifferent, and the air coming off it had that cold that gets into old joints before anything else wakes up. I made porridge I couldn't eat. I sat at the kitchen table, where I have sat for 22 years, in the chair with the slightly uneven leg that I keep meaning to fix and haven't, and I thought about the fact that if something went wrong in that theater, the last meaningful conversation I had with my youngest child was him saying, "Yeah, nah, I'll try." I thought about that for a while. Then I called a taxi, because I had not wanted to ask anyone to park at the hospital for 4 hours. And I went. The surgery went well. Dr. Mehta found more damage than the scans had shown, which she mentioned in the recovery ward with the same measured calm she used for everything. And she told me I would be in for longer than originally planned. They kept me for 11 days. 11 days in Whanganui Hospital, with a shoulder that had been taken apart and reassembled, and a room that smelled of antiseptic and warm meals, and the faint institutional sadness of places where people wait. There is a particular quality to time in a hospital room. It moves differently than ordinary time. The days are made of small units. The morning obs, the breakfast tray, the physio session, the afternoon obs, the dinner tray, the evening medication, lights gradually dimming in the corridor. If you have someone in the chair beside your bed, the time passes between you. If you do not have someone in the chair beside your bed, the time passes anyway, but you feel the weight of it more clearly. The chair beside my bed was a green plastic thing with a cushioned seat that had seen better decades. I spent a disproportionate amount of time looking at it, not because I was sentimental about furniture, but because it was simply there, and it was simply empty, and there was something in that combination that accumulated meaning over the days in a way I had not anticipated. Derek called on day 1. He asked how the surgery went. I told him Dr. Mehta said it had gone well. He said, "That's good, Dad, really good." He asked whether I was comfortable. I said I was managing. He asked if I needed anything sent up, and I said no. And he said, "Right, well, keep us posted." On day 4, he called again. He asked how I was going, and then, with what I can only describe as a smooth transition, he mentioned that the property market in Whanganui had been doing interesting things lately, and had I thought about whether the section was fully utilized. "Just thinking about your future, Dad. Just want to make sure you're set up well." I told him the section was perfectly utilized. I had built the house on it myself. He said, "Of course. Of course." Just thinking out loud. Lynette called every second day for the first week. I will give her that. She called reliably, and she asked real questions, and she laughed at the right moments when I described the physio session that had brought me to language I don't normally use. But she did not come. Each call contained a reason she had not yet made it up, and each reason was presented with the exhausted sincerity of someone who genuinely believed the reason was sufficient. Poppy had a concert. Marcus had a work trip. There was a thing with the car. The weather had been terrible between here and there. On day 6, she told me she was absolutely coming on day 8. On day 8, she did not come. She sent a text. "Dad, I'm so sorry, something's come up. I'll explain when I talk to you. Love you heaps." I read the text twice. I set my phone on the bedside table. I looked at the green plastic chair, and something settled in me. The way a foundation settles. Not breaking, just finding its final position. Brendan did not call at all for the first 5 days. On day 6, he sent a voice message. He was clearly walking somewhere when he recorded it, because there was wind across the microphone and the occasional sound of traffic. He said he hoped I was on the mend. He said shoulder surgery was no joke, He said he'd been meaning to call sooner, but things had been hectic. He did not specify what things. He said he'd try to come up when things settled down. He did not specify when things would settle down. He said, "Take it easy, Dad." He did not call again. On day 8, a nurse named Hemi, a young man in his early 30s with a quiet efficiency and the kind of steadiness you hope for in a person who is managing your pain relief, came in to do my evening observations. He took my blood pressure, made a note, checked my shoulder dressing, made another note. Then he glanced at the empty chair. He looked back at me with the careful neutrality of someone who has made this kind of assessment before. And he said, quietly, "Have you got people coming in, Mr. Tuho?" I said, "My family's down in Auckland and Christchurch." He nodded slowly. He said, "I'll make sure you've always got someone to call if you need anything tonight." He meant the call button. He meant the nursing staff. He was 20 years younger than my youngest child, and he was offering me more presents than any of them had managed in 8 days. Before he left, he straightened the blanket at the foot of my bed. Just a small adjustment. Not asked for, just done. I have thought about that small adjustment many times since. On day 11, Dr. Mehta signed my discharge papers. She told me the shoulder had done well, that I would need to attend outpatient physio for 12 weeks, and that I should not under any circumstances attempt anything overhead for at least 2 months. She said this with the particular emphasis of someone who has treated tradespeople before and knows what we do when we are told not to do things. I said I understood. A volunteer from the patient services team walked me out to the entrance in a wheelchair, which I found both unnecessary and oddly moving. "Hospital policy," she explained. I thanked her. She patted my good shoulder and said, "You take care now." I sat at the entrance for a moment and looked out at the car park. The Whanganui morning was doing what August mornings do here, pale and cold and getting on with it regardless. I called a taxi from my phone. The driver was a woman named Sandra who asked whether I'd been in long. I said 11 days. She said, "Gosh, that's a stretch." She asked if someone was home waiting for me. I said no. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Well, I hope the recovery goes smoothly." She helped me get my bag to the front door. I thanked her. She said, "You sure you're right from here?" I said I was. She drove away. I stood at my own front door for longer than I needed to. There was no reason to stand there. My shoulder was aching in the particular deep way that surgical pain aches, different from injury pain, more fundamental. I had a sling and a folder of discharge instructions and a paper bag of medications. The door was the same door I had hung in this frame in 2003. The handle was the same brushed steel handle I had fitted the following spring. I had built this house around this door and this handle and this frame, and I stood outside it for a moment that I still cannot fully explain before I went in. The house was exactly as I had left it 11 days before. There is a version of that sentence that sounds like a relief. This was not that version. When you leave your house alone and you return to it alone and it is exactly as you left it, it means the only person who has the measure of your daily life is you. No one had come to bring in the mail that had stacked up in the letterbox. No one had watered the tomato seedlings on the kitchen windowsill, which had died, which was something I had half expected and had still managed to feel. No one had sat in the kitchen and had a cup of tea and been present in the space where I live. No one came. I moved through the kitchen slowly, carefully. The way you move when one arm is in a sling and the other is doing the work of two. I put the jug on. I stood at the window and looked out at the backyard. At the garden beds I had built from sleepers. At the pohutukawa in the back corner that I had planted the year I finished the house and that had now grown well past the roofline. At the old wooden workbench along the fence where I still keep my hand tools. Everything exactly where I had left it. Everything exactly where it had always been. I thought about Hemi straightening the blanket at the foot of my bed. I thought about Sandra asking if someone was home waiting. I thought about my son saying, "Yeah, nah, I'll try," which he had not. I thought about what it means to have built things that last. Not just houses, not just structures, but a family, a life, a set of expectations about how people behave toward each other when it counts. I had thought I understood load distribution. I had thought I knew which elements would hold. The jug boiled. I made tea. I carried it to the chair by the front window, which is where I always sit. In the chair that has the worn patch on the right armrest from 30 years of the same elbow, resting in the same place. I sat down. The street outside was going about its Tuesday morning. A man walking his dog. A woman reversing her car out of a driveway. The ordinary movements of people with places to be. I sat with my tea and the quiet of the house and the specific weight of 11 days that I was now going to have to do something with. I finished the tea. I set the cup down, and then I picked up the phone, not to call Derek, not to call Lynette, not to call Brendan. I called a man named Gordon Fry, who has been my solicitor for 23 years and who is, in my experience, the most precisely honest person I know outside of the building trade. He has a manner that people sometimes mistake for coldness, but which I have always recognized as the particular quality of a person who takes accuracy seriously. I told him I needed to come in. He said he could see me Thursday. I said Thursday would be fine. Now, I want to say something about how I operate, because I think it matters for understanding what came next. I am not a person who acts out of anger. I spent 34 years in a trade where anger is expensive. An angry carpenter makes crooked cuts. An angry builder reads a plan wrong and has to take a wall down. What I have always done instead is assess. You look at the situation in front of you. You determine what has failed and what is still sound. You work out what the structure actually needs, not what you wish it needed, what it actually needs. Then you build accordingly. I sat across from Gordon Fry on a Thursday afternoon in late August, and I told him what I needed. He listened without interrupting for the entirety of it, which took about 9 minutes. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, in the way that precise people are quiet when they are making sure they have understood something completely. Then he said, "Are you certain, Neville?" I told him I had been certain since day 8. He said he would prepare the documents. I thanked him and walked out into the Whanganui afternoon, which was doing what Whanganui afternoons do in August, cold and clear, and carrying the smell of the river. 6 weeks after I was discharged, I invited all 3 of my children to come for the weekend. I told them I was feeling good, that the shoulder was coming along, that I wanted to see everyone. I cooked a lamb shoulder on the Saturday, low and slow the way my wife used to, with rosemary from the garden and the good potatoes from the Pakiaka Road grower I've been buying from for 15 years. I set the table properly. I put on the record player, something easy and unhurried. By every visible measure, I was a 71-year-old man who was simply glad his family had come. Derek arrived first, which he always does, because arriving first is Derek's way of establishing something. He came through the door with a bottle of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc and the particular energy of a man who has prepared himself for this visit. He hugged me, longer than usual, with the extra fraction of a second that signals awareness of a debt. Then his eyes moved through the room with the careful efficiency of someone who is not really looking at the room. He was cataloging it. The Rimu floors I had laid myself. The built-in shelves I had fitted in 2005. The view of the back garden through the ranch slider. A quick, professional survey, wrapped in warmth. "Nice to see the place looking well, Dad," he said. "It always looks well," I said. It was built to last. Lynette came in 20 minutes later with Poppy, who ran at me before Lynette had finished her apology for the drive and the traffic and the usual difficulty of getting Marcus to commit to a Saturday departure time. I held Poppy carefully with my good arm, and she pressed her face into my chest and said, "Granddad, I missed you." I said I missed her too. I said it honestly. Lynette began, as I had expected, to explain the hospital. I will not replay it in full. There was a reference to Marcus's roster and to Poppy's concert. and to the car that had needed something, and to how dreadful she had felt the entire time, and how she had thought about me every single day. People who have thought about you every single day are capable of calling more than every other day, I noted privately. But I did not say so. I poured her a glass of wine and asked about her garden in Christchurch, which she loves, and she lit up talking about it, and I watched her in the way you watch someone you have known since they were born, trying to hold the whole of them at once, the person they are and the person they could be. Brendan arrived 40 minutes after the stated time, which was predictable, and which I had accounted for in the cooking. He came in with the loose energy of someone who has driven 5 hours and is genuinely pleased to have arrived. He kissed me on the cheek. He sat down. He did not mention the hospital or the 11 days or the voice message with the traffic in the background. He asked what was in the oven because it smelled incredible, and Poppy told him it was Granddad's lamb, and he said, "Legend." I watched him settle into the evening with the easy comfort of someone who does not carry the weight of things. He was, I noticed, completely at home. He had always been completely at home wherever he was. It was perhaps the most endearing and the most maddening thing about him. We ate well. We talked. The evening had the warmth that shared meals create, the kind that is real, regardless of what sits underneath it. Poppy told me about her science project and insisted on explaining it in more detail than the project itself probably warranted, and I gave her my full attention because she is 8 and she is my granddaughter, and the project about worm farms was, honestly, more interesting than most of the conversations I had had in 11 days of hospitalization. I kept my face open and my voice warm, and I did not perform anything. What I felt was genuinely complicated. You can love your children and see them clearly. The two things coexist. I have never found this easy, but I have always found it true. After dessert, I set down my fork. I said, "While you're all here, there's something I've been meaning to mention." The table shifted, not dramatically. A small collective adjustment, a slight orientation toward me, the way a structure shifts weight when a new load is introduced. I said. The surgery got me thinking. At 71, it makes sense to have everything in order. I've been working with Gordon on updating the documents, making sure the arrangements are where they need to be. Derek said, very thoughtfully, "That sounds like a sensible thing to do, Dad." Lynette said, "Of course. That's so responsible." Brendan, to his credit, simply nodded and asked if there was more lamb. I told him there was. I passed the potatoes. I did not say anything further. What happened over the following months was orderly. That is the word I keep returning to. It was all very orderly. Derek began calling every Sunday morning with a consistency that would have been touching if it had not been preceded by 11 days of silence. He asked about my shoulder, my sleep, my appetite, my next physio appointment. He was thorough. And then, with a naturalness that I almost admired for its craftsmanship, he would find his way to a question about the property. Had I looked into what similar sections were going for lately? Had Gordon mentioned anything about the structure of the estate? Was I happy with my current financial arrangements? Just being practical, Dad. Just thinking about your peace of mind. I told him my peace of mind was fine. I thanked him for calling. I meant both things. Lynette began coming up to Whanganui on the first Saturday of each month. She brought Poppy, which I was glad for in a way that I kept separate from everything else, because Poppy is Poppy, and she deserves her own column. Lynette brought food, good food, the kind that required actual thought. The cheese I like from the Kapiti shop, the decent bread, sometimes a container of soup she had made herself. She was warm and present and genuinely good company. Sitting across the kitchen table from her on those Saturdays while Poppy drew things at the other end, I felt something that I had not been prepared for. Not satisfaction. Grief, of a particular kind. Not for what was happening now, which was real and good, but for the version of her that had always been available. This Lynette had been here all along, capable of showing up, capable of presence. She had simply chosen, for 11 days when it would have mattered most, to be somewhere else. I drank my tea. I told her the soup was excellent. I meant it. Brendan texted more than he called, which is a Brendan thing, and his texts had the rambling affection of someone who is not sure what to say, but wants to say something. He sent a photo once of a beach in the Sounds where he had gone for a long weekend. No message. Just the photo. I looked at it for a while. Then I replied, "Beautiful spot." Because it was. They came, each in their own way, with the devoted energy of people who have become newly aware that something is at stake. I received every visit. I cooked when they came. I laughed when it was funny, and I asked real questions, and I was present in the way I have always tried to be present, because that is not something I was willing to compromise regardless of what else was true. I did not mention the hospital. Not once, in any conversation with any of them, over all those months. No sideways comment, no weighted silence. No careful, nothing that signals something unsaid. The hospital had happened. I had come home to a dead plant and a full letterbox and a house that held only my own 11-day-old shape. I had processed it the way I process most things. I did not need them to apologize. I needed them to understand. And understanding, in my experience, requires the right information delivered at the right time through the right mechanism. Gordon had the mechanism. The timing was already set. There is an oak tree in my back garden that I planted when Brendan was born. It is 37 years old. It is now taller than the house. When I built this place, I chose the position for that tree carefully, because I knew where it would eventually cast shade and where the roots would eventually run. And I built accordingly. I did not plant the tree and then complain about the shade. I read the future of the thing, and I planned around it. That is what building is. That is what this was. I had a conversation I did not expect in early November, on a Tuesday afternoon, when the light in Whanganui had gone that particular warm gold that it gets just before the temperature drops back in the evening. Poppy rang me from Lynette's phone, which she sometimes does, because she is 8, and she has not yet learned to pretend that she does not want to talk to someone when she does. She asked me what my favorite dinosaur was. I told her it was the Brachiosaurus because it was the one that ate plants and didn't bother anyone and got on with things. She said hers was the T-Rex because it was the boss. I said that sounded about right. She told me about a dream she had had involving a worm farm and a time machine, which I followed attentively. Then she said, "Granddad, are you lonely?" I sat very still for a moment. I said, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She said, "Mum said you live by yourself and I just wondered." I said, "I like living by myself." I said, "But I like it more when people come to visit." She said, "We should come more." I said, "Yes, I think we should." She said she would tell her mum. I said that would be very helpful. She handed the phone back to Lynette, who had clearly heard some of this, and was quiet for a moment before she said, "Sorry, Dad. Was that okay?" I said it was more than okay. I said Poppy was the most direct person I knew, which was a quality to be encouraged. Lynette laughed, slightly unevenly. We talked for a while about ordinary things, and I noticed, not for the first time, the difference between the Lynette on the phone in those weeks after the surgery and the Lynette I had been talking to these last few months. It was not a small difference. It is spring now. The Pohutukawa is doing what it always does in October, preparing its own version of announcement. The red beginning to gather at the tips of the branches, making its plans without consulting anyone. I walk 2 kilometers every morning along the river, which I was not doing before the surgery, which means the shoulder reconstruction has, in some mechanical sense, improved my overall situation even as it clarified other things. I have full range of motion back. Dr. Mehta is pleased. I am pleased. I made a donation last month to the Whanganui Hospital Foundation, specifically to a fund for patient well-being. The kind that supplies better chairs for the rooms where families are supposed to sit, and warm blankets, and the small things that make the long hours less bare. I made it in Hemi's name. I told no one. I did not need to. My will now lists 3 organizations where 3 names used to be. The first is the Whanganui River Trust, because the river has been here longer than any of us, and it deserves someone looking after it with the same seriousness with which it has looked after this town. The second is a trade scholarship through the local polytechnic, because I believe in the dignity of building things and in giving young people the tools to do it properly. The third is a children's ward fund at Whanganui Hospital, because children in hospital did not choose to be there, and they deserve better than bare rooms and empty chairs. The house on this section, the one I built from the ground up over 2 years with my own plans and my own hands, the Rimu floors and the built-in shelves and the pohutukawa in the back corner, will be liquidated after I am gone, and the proceeds will go to those same 3 organizations. Gordon knows. Gordon has known since August. Gordon is a precise and patient man, and he will execute everything exactly as specified. There is one more document in the file, a letter. 1 page, written by hand, in the particular neat print of someone who spent decades marking up building plans and learned early that his measurements needed to be readable by anyone who picked them up. It is addressed to Derek, Lynette, and Brendan, to be opened at the appropriate time. I will tell you what it says. It says, "By the time you read this, you will have questions. I want to answer the most important one because I have always believed in accurate information and I am not going to stop now. I was in Whanganui Hospital for 11 days following my shoulder surgery. The surgery was on a Tuesday in August. I came home in a taxi. I told each of you the date 6 weeks in advance. I came home to a house that was exactly as I had left it. The tomato seedlings on the kitchen windowsill had died. I want to be clear about those 11 days, not to cause pain, but because you deserve to know the precise load-bearing reason for the decisions in this document. In building, we call it transparency. I do not write this with anger. I am not an angry man. I write it because I spent 34 years building things that were meant to last, and I applied the same standards to everything I built, including this family, including this decision. The house was built well. I hope the people who receive it find it useful. I love you. That has never been complicated, not for a single day of your lives. Dad, it is a Saturday morning in October. The sun is on the river and the pohutukawa is deciding about its flowers. And I am drinking tea on the back step with my good shoulder toward the warmth. Lynette is bringing Poppy up next weekend. I have been planning the worm farm project with a seriousness that Poppy does not yet know about and which I think she is going to appreciate enormously. I have sourced the materials. I have drawn a small plan, to scale, with labeled components. Poppy will be the project manager. This is already decided. Derek will call tomorrow morning and we will talk about my health and then about the property market, and I will answer his questions about my health with honesty and his questions about the property with patience, because he is my son, because love is not something you portion out based on performance, because I was there when he was born, and I will be there, in whatever form available to me, for as long as I am here. The documents are Gordon's department. Brendan will text something at some point. It will be affectionate and only loosely connected to any specific topic. I will reply with full sentences, because I was raised right, and because he is mine, and because you can love someone with complete sincerity while still allowing a structure to do what it was built to do. I want to say something for anyone who is sitting with a similar weight. Not advice. Exactly. I am a builder, not a counselor. But I am 71, and I have had 11 days in a hospital room in a long time since to think about what I know. Presence is not a small thing. It is not a backup gesture for when you have nothing better going on. Being there when someone is frightened and in pain and in a room that smells of antiseptic is one of the most fundamental things one human being can offer another. No explanation afterwards restores what absence cost. A phone call is not a presence. A text that says "love you heaps" is not a presence. Showing up is a presence, and it is noticed, always, in both directions. The people who come are remembered. The people who do not are also remembered. You cannot spend a life building something and then be surprised by what it will and will not hold. The structures you build, with your children, with your family, with the people you love, they are built from what you actually do, not from what you intend, not from what you feel, not from how busy you are. The build record is the truth of the thing. Everything else is the plans you drew but didn't follow. And the last thing, a small thing that I think matters more than it sounds. Talk to the people you love while they are here. Ask your father about what he actually built. Ask your mother what she was afraid of when she was young. Ask the questions while there is still someone to answer them. Because one day there will be an envelope in a solicitor's office and a letter in neat drafting print and questions that arrive too late. Do not let that be the moment you started paying attention. The river is doing what it does. The Pohutukawa is doing what it does. The cardinal, or whatever it is that visits this garden, that is a coter, a kingfisher, who comes to the fence post every few days and looks at me with the particular indifference of a creature that has no obligations and has made its peace with that. He is there this morning for 11 seconds. And then he is not. I raise my cup. I go back to the garden. The rose by the back fence is coming in again, right on schedule. As it has every October for 20 years, asking nothing, requiring nothing, simply doing what it was put here to do. Everything is exactly where it needs to be.